Alaskans, wherever you are, welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show. Coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska. Where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started.
Welcome, everybody, to the Must Read Alaska Show. I'm your host, John Quick, coming to you live from somewhere in Alaska. I hope everybody's having a phenomenal summer so far. I know me and my family did some RV trips. It is now raining here on the Kenai Peninsula, but that's a good thing. My lawn's going to be green, so I approve of that. School's coming right around the corner. Parents are gearing up, getting everything ready for their kids to go back to school. If you listen, watch, and read Must Read Alaska and you want to help keep the lights on, just go to mustreadalaska.com. On the right-hand side, there's a little donate button. Every $5, $10, $100 helps keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska. If you want to sponsor the Must Read Alaska show, just email me, John, John, at mustreadalaska.com. We have a very special guest today, somebody who's returned. I think you might have the most amount of returning episodes ever. Rick Whitbeck, the director of Power of the Future of Alaska. Welcome back to the Must Read Alaska show.
Always great to be here, John. I appreciate the fact that I may hold the record, I may not, but let's keep it going because I enjoy coming on. So it's always a blessing to be on. Yeah, it's raining up here too in Anchorage, and after the last couple of weeks, I had a vacation and glorious weather on the Kenai Peninsula. Rain is necessary. I mean, we had, I think, one day of it while I was on vacay. Got some color on this bald dome of mine, and now I get to go out and have rain pour off at the top of it. So it's always good to be back on the show. Appreciate it.
That's awesome. So tell people first, just remind folks of who you are and what you do. I think it's a very important role here in Alaska. What do you get to do here in Alaska?
Well, so Power of the Future was started to be a voice for energy workers across the country, right? I mean, so many decisions are made in the power centers of DC and on the coast with little regard for the actual locations, communities, and people that those power centers forget about, right? So let's shut down fossil fuels. Well, fossil fuels aren't created in Washington. I mean, the policy is created in Washington, D.C. Coal is mined in Wyoming and Alaska and West Virginia. Oil is pumped in, Alaska and New Mexico and places that most of these policymakers have never, ever stepped foot in. They've never been to a mine site. They couldn't spell, rig if you spotted them the R and the G. So, but they're making policy that affects tens of millions of Americans, directly and indirectly from jobs. And then they impact every American in their pocketbook, in energy costs, in inflationary tactics, and an administrative burden. And so Power of the Future is a voice for energy sanity. We fight for workers, we fight for opportunities, we fight for projects, and we push back on this whole narrative that traditional energy in all of its forms is bad for America, it's bad for consumers, it's bad for the planet, it's bad for the climate. That's all bunk. And so we as aggressively as we can change the narrative and add a voice to the energy conversation that wasn't there before Power of the Future came around.
That's awesome. So let's talk about Cook Inlet Energy, because I think that's, I live here on the Kenai Peninsula out here in Nikiski, where, there's lots of those kinds of things happening. I think,
Yep.
We've since Walker, even before then, we've been hopeful for a potential big project. What's your take on what's going on in the Cook Inlet? Give us kind of an update from your perspective, and if you're hopeful for the future.
Well, I'm hopeful for the future because we need this solution to come sooner rather than later, right? I mean, let's first of all say this. There's not a shortage of Cook Inlet natural gas. There's decades of natural gas under the crust of the earth. There's a political will shortage amongst lawmakers and policymakers to figure out a way to get that gas to market. Now, you have Hillcorp, who's doing everything that they can, and I want to just give a shout out to Hillcorp. They are producing 90+% of the gas out of Cook Inlet right now. They're doing everything they can. They're going to go explore for new wells this year. They've got a jackup rig there. Then you have Hex Fury, with John Hendricks and his crew ready to go and start pumping gas into the market. But they've got a royalty issue, and they've got some some burdensome costs that the legislature could have addressed and chose not to in the waning days of session. Then you have Benji and the people at Bluecrest, who really just need financing. And in today's political economy, with the climate cult saying that every drop of oil and every cubic foot of natural gas that's pulled out of the planet is creating a climate crisis, well, it's harder to get financing. So there's a political will missing, and as a result, you're going to have some short-term pain, I think, from imported LNG. I think that Instar's moving ahead with that because they need certainty in their contracts. I don't blame them, but from a regulatory cost standpoint and from a consumer cost standpoint, I'm certainly not looking forward to 20, 30, 40% higher bills as their cost of supply goes up. We have trillions, hundreds of trillions of cubic feet of natural gas up on the North Slope, John. And if we could ever get a gas pipeline, AK LNG project, bullet line, we could serve the rail belt from Fairbanks to Homer and all locations in between for over 100 years, well over 100 years, and give us export opportunities as well. Again, that's a political will meeting financial reality. It's a $50 billion project. Banks don't want to lend in the Arctic because of the climate crisis. And so, there has to be a meeting of the minds, because right now, there's not a Cook Inlet energy shortage as much as there's a Cook Inlet supply crunch due to policy issues that could be addressed and should be addressed today rather than tomorrow.
And when you say policy issues, for the folks listening in, is this folks policy issues from a federal standpoint, from a state standpoint, both? Kind of what's your take on that?
Yeah, certainly the federal government's not doing anybody any help. Whether it's the Biden administration canceling leases in Cook Inlet, which therefore doesn't allow for additional exploration, to the legislature not taking up a bill that could have helped spur and incentivize Cook Inlet actual energy production, gas production, to the courts siding with the environmental left and the radical environmental movement that doesn't want to see any more oil pumped out of the ground. You have this combination of federal and state and judicial decisions and stymies that are impacting consumers, and they're impacting businesses. And every energy underpins everything. I talk about it all the time, right? Whether it's on your podcast, on articles and must read, on my show, on anything, energy underpins everything. Without affordable, reliable energy, your cost of transportation goes up, your cost of supply goes up, your actual utilities go up, your day-to-day costs go up, and that affects your pocketbook. So it leads to decreased monies that you could go have discretionary spend on. If you don't have money to go to the movies, or don't have money to go to go get ice cream because you're spending it on energy costs, well, then that's a problem, because then the money doesn't flow through the economy and small businesses get hurt. Who doesn't get hurt? The people who are pushing the ideology that energy production is bad. Again, why Power of the Future exists, to push back on that stupid narrative.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's I often think about the celebrities who are all about climate change, who take their private jets to the G8 meeting or something like that. These people that come up with these ridiculous policies or support these policies, they don't mind if they use the gas. They just don't want us using it.
John Kerry is probably the biggest hypocrite out there, right? Well, the only way for me to do my job is to fly private, and I offset with carbon credits. Come on, John. Like, you want me to eat bugs, and you're going to go fly, to Davos on your private jet just because you can afford to offset the social cost of carbon? Well, tell you what, when you give up that and you start eating bugs for stuff instead of your wife's Heinz ketchup on top of your filet mignon, then I'll start actually caring what you say.
So what about, I've had some guests on the last couple months who have said, and I'm paraphrasing, but Alaska needs to move to green energy. We need to be, the majority of our energy needs to come from green energy solutions. What's your take on that?
You first. How about this? When we were in the midst of the coldest part of this last winter, the last week of January in Anchorage, I know it was 30 below down there on the peninsula for a couple of days. We hit 25, 30 below here in Anchorage, and it was 40, 45 below in parts of the valley up north. And between the Eklutna Dam providing about 10% instead of its normal 6%, and Hillcorp draining some of its reserves with the natural gas production, that's what kept South Central Alaska and the Kenai Peninsula with its lights on and its heat pumping. Let me tell you exactly how many houses were helped by the huge green project called the Fire Island Wind. 700 homes in Anchorage were powered for that week. On average, it was like 680 to 730 per day because of this massive 11 turbine farm out on Fire Island. How many were helped by the huge solar array out in Willow? Zippo. Not one, because it like 13 below, according to Tony Izzo out at Matanuska Electric, and like 13 below, they have to shut it down because it actually costs more energy to keep the solar array working than the solar array is actually producing at that temperature. So 700 homes would have been powered. Nothing would have been heated without the Eklutna Dam, which did about 28,000 homes and businesses. And the rest of everybody, including all their heat from Homer to Willow, were powered by natural gas that day. So tell you what, when REAP and all these eco guys come on your show or anywhere else and start talking about we can get to 80% renewables, you first. When you live off the grid, when you do away with your computers, and when you help establish domestic supplies of strategic and critical minerals rather than selling out to China, then I'll start listening to you. Otherwise, you're playing in an adult world with a bunch of crayons and coloring books.
Yeah, I think some of this is nice, fancy headlines. I listened to an interview with the Secretary of Transportation in Biden administration, and the CNN host asked him, you have all this money. I think it was like, I don't know, $4 billion to put up these electrical hot spots where people can plug in their electrical cars all over the federal grid. And you've had 3 years and you put up 6.
Yeah, 7 now, by the way. 7. Yes. It's officially 7. Thank you, Mayor Pete, for your leadership on that important issue.
I mean, that's so god awful. It's hilarious, but it's just like so sad at the same time. That's what we're faced with. Fancy headlines, lots of potential green money, but 7 stations put up.
In the Inflation Creation Act, misnamed the Inflation Reduction Act, $396 billion with a B to drive green infrastructure. It's grift. It's absolute grift. You're going to see Solyndra on a massive scale. And then what happens when somebody rational like President Trump comes back in office and says, whoa, we're spending $400 billion to do nothing, truly not change a thing when it comes to the climate, when it comes to solving the crisis, and I'm using air quotes around that for those listening to the podcast, who aren't making any significant changes to the atmosphere, because the U.S. has such a small percentage of global emissions compared to the Chinas and the Indias of the world that we're not going to make the difference that the climate cult wants you to make. And John, all you're doing is handing out, like I said, hundreds of billions of dollars to your friends and buddies to create solutions, and I'm saying solutions again in air quotes, right, that aren't going to drive any change. But it's going to make everybody feel good, and it's going to, bring kumbaya moments, and it's going to bring donors back to those Democrats' campaign funds and campaign coffers. So hell, let's just do it, because that makes everybody, win in the end, right? Because the more Democrats that can get elected, the better climate policy will be. It's a self-perpetuating race to the bottom for the U.S. as we, and I say we, as a country, try to adapt and adopt to a decarbonized world. Number one, it can't happen.
So,
number two, it's not good.
Everybody just probably saw or will see today that Kamala Harris picked her VP. What's your take on how good or bad the Biden administration has been so far for Alaska, and what do you think 4 more years of this is going to do for Alaska if Kamala gets elected?
Well, so let's first of all talk about the 66 and counting administrative or executive orders that the Biden-Harris administration has whammied Alaska with. And for those of you who don't believe me on this number, go to Senator Sullivan's website at sullivan.senate.gov. Right on the front page is the last frontier lockup. You can go to the link, and it's 66 times that the Biden administration has targeted Alaska for anti-development, anti-resource-based opportunities that have shut down parts of our economy. 66 times since taking office January 20th, 2021. And counting, by the way. That number continues to go up once every couple of weeks. They update that. So first of all, the Biden-Harris administration has been abominable for Alaska's economy, for our jobs, for our opportunities, and for our energy future. The Harris-Walz administration could be even worse, because where Joe Biden talks about being middle-class Joe and, a friend of, from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and understands the oil and gas industry, even though he's tried to shut it down and promised that he would end fossil fuels on the campaign trail back in 2020, and he's tried like hell to do that. John, he's not the cultist that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are. Tim Walz, lockstep with Gavin Newsom in the state of Minnesota, has signed decarbonization plans that want to take Minnesotans from 1% of EV use to 20 by 2035. Wants to take them to net neutral, carbon neutral by 2040. I mean, if that's not a sign of idiocy, I don't know what is. When he was in Congress, he signed cap and trade agreements. He signed legislation as the governor to impose mandates on getting rid of traditional energy. And then in one of the biggest faux pas, and I'm not going to say, in one of the worst decisions that he has made as governor, but this shows his ideological bent, when the Biden-Harris administration canceled the Twin Metals mine permits up in northeast Minnesota, which was a huge, almost pebble level copper, nickel, cobalt deposit. They had permits, and the Biden administration canceled them. Rather than fight for the 2,200, 2,300 jobs that would have been directly and indirectly impacted, rather than fight for his green energy supply chain, rather than fight for the people of Minnesota, he capitulated and said, we'll get it elsewhere because we can't mess with the ecosystem up there. Let's contrast that with Dunleavy, right? And Pebble. Biden-Harris administration does the exact same thing with Pebble. And Mike, to his credit, has fought like the Dickens to try to change that in the courts. We're suing the federal government over the EPA's decision to preemptively shut down Pebble. Whether or not you agree with me on Pebble, and I'm one of the biggest advocates of the state who doesn't work for Pebble, it's a world-class deposit of something that the green advocates say is needed. And why would we continue to empower China with this green technology in the supply chain when we know that they have nothing but our worst interests at heart? Tim Walz capitulated. Mike Dunleavy fights. Harris-Walz is could be 10 times worse ideologically than Harris-Biden or Biden-Harris or Obama V2 or whatever you want to call it, right? Harris-Walz would be horrible for Alaska.
So let's say former President Trump wins. How quickly do you think he can unravel things that Biden wound up in a ball for Alaska?
Well, administrative and executive orders can be overturned by administrative and executive orders, right? We saw that with the way that Biden just came in and undid a lot of the Trump era policies that had been done by, the EPA and Interior and things like that. But really, I think what has happened is I think you're going to see the courts start to unravel more and more of those in conjunction with good, sound policy by Trump. We saw this with the Supreme Court, the Chevron decision, John, where the courts basically said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Congress creates laws, the executive branch administers those laws, the judiciary makes sure that they're legal. Let's go back to what we're supposed to be doing. So I think that the Trump administration, when they take over in January 2025, should just go back to the courts and say, was this legal? Nope. Okay, get rid of it. Was this legal? Nope. Get rid of it. Was this legal? Nope. Get rid of it. Was this legal? Nope. Get rid of it. Rather than playing the, I'm going to override your executive order with a new executive order, you just look back to the courts and say, did this meet the administrative overreach that Chevron is designed, that decision is designed to kill, and let the courts overrule. Now, the problem is that you have a whole bunch of entrenched career bureaucrats that have an ecological bent, that are placed in there under the Obama and even the Clinton administration, who are still working, that hate everything that, traditional energy provides for America. So until you get rid of some of those people, and again, those are 20, 30-year employees, it's going to be hard to enact those really quickly. But again, a Trump-Vance administration has 4 years, and I would hope that they would put good people in key positions and start to untangle the mess that the Biden-Harris administration will have left America and especially Alaska in.
So 30 minutes here has gone by in a flash. Last question to you is this: are you hopeful for Alaska? And why? Yes or no?
Oh, yeah, I'm always hopeful for Alaska. We have so much opportunity, John. I mean, think about this: whether you're up on the North Slope or down on the Panhandle, Alaska is blessed by God with just tremendous resource opportunities. It's not just oil and natural gas. It's, critical and strategic minerals. It's gold. It's copper. It's fish. It's timber. It's coal. We have so much opportunity. We just need an opportunity to unlock it, and we need an opportunity to develop it safely and responsibly, and do what we've done for decades. Steward the lands with an environmental understanding, but use those to drive America and Alaska forward. I'm super bullish on what could happen as long as we get good, sound policymakers at the federal and state levels and local. But if we go back to what should be happening federally, with Chevron in our back pocket, with a good administrative state, I'm super excited for what happens in the next couple of decades here in Alaska.
Nice. Well, Rick, I really appreciate you joining us here on the
Always.
show. Welcome back anytime. Folks, if you just caught the tail end of this, I want to encourage you to go back and listen to the whole thing. Rick Whitbeck, the director of Power of the Future Alaska. I'll put all the links in the podcast description so you can go check out his website and Twitter and his show as well. For folks that listen, watch, and read Must Read Alaska, if you want to help keep the lights on, just go to mustreadalaska.com. On the right-hand side, there's a little donate button. Every $5, $10, $100 helps keep the lights on here at Must Read Alaska. If you want to sponsor the Must Read Alaska show, the #1 podcast in Alaska, just email me, John, JOHN, at mustreadalaska.com. We'd love to have you sponsor the show. Everybody enjoy your summer. And until next time, I'm John Quick from somewhere in Alaska. Thanks, Rick.